When a court speaks and the government refuses to listen, what exactly is the law worth? That question is no longer theoretical in Nigeria. It is playing out in real time. And today, the Federal High Court answered it the only way a court can. It spoke again, louder, with more force, and with the full weight of constitutional authority behind every word. Nnamdi Kanu has once again been ordered released, not for the first time, not as a new development in isolation, but as a direct consequence of what this court already declared and what the federal government, in the weeks that followed, either could not or would not implement. Today's ruling is not simply a legal judgment. It is a public rebuke of executive inaction, and it raises a question that every Nigerian watching this case must now sit with. If the government cannot comply with a court order, what does that mean for the rule of law in this country? To understand the full weight of what happened today, you need to go back to where this began. The Federal High Court had previously delivered a landmark judgment overturning Nnamdi Kanu's life sentence. It declared the conviction constitutionally defective. It found that critical violations of due process, including the right to fair hearing and proper judicial procedure, had infected the prosecution from its foundations. The sentence was declared null and void. The conviction was stripped of all legal effect, and the court ordered his immediate release from custody. That order was clear. It was binding. It was delivered by a court of competent jurisdiction operating within its full constitutional authority, and yet days passed, then more days, and Nnamdi Kanu remained in detention. The reasons offered by government officials were varied. Some pointed to administrative processes, others cited security concerns, some suggested that other pending charges or legal instruments remained in place and needed separate resolution before any release could happen. But the court had addressed exactly this point in its earlier ruling. Once a conviction is overturned, the legal authority underpinning continued imprisonment disappears. There is no lawful basis remaining. And yet the detention continued. That is the context in which today's ruling must be understood. The court did not return to this matter because new facts emerged. It returned because a binding order was not carried out, and in doing so, the judge made clear that judicial decisions are not suggestions. They are not recommendations for government agencies to weigh against political convenience. They are the law, and the law does not wait indefinitely for compliance. Inside the courtroom today, the atmosphere was charged. Legal practitioners, journalists, and observers packed the room, aware that what was about to unfold represented something more than a routine proceeding. This was a court being asked to confront the limits of its own authority and to reassert it in the face of institutional resistance. The judge was unambiguous. He restated the earlier findings in full. The life sentence was invalid. The conviction was constitutionally defective. The order for release had been properly made and remained fully in effect from the moment it was first delivered. Nothing had changed legally to justify Kanu's continued detention, and the failure to comply with the court's directive could not be allowed to continue without response. The court then did something significant. It did not simply repeat the earlier order. It reinforced it with sharper language and clearer directives aimed at the specific institutions responsible for implementation. Correctional authorities, relevant federal agencies, and enforcement bodies were addressed directly. The message was stripped of ambiguity. Comply immediately, without further delay or qualification. The judge stated that judgments delivered by competent courts are binding on all government agencies, institutions, and officials connected to the matter. This is not a discretionary obligation. It is a constitutional one, and the court made plain that failure to obey lawful judicial orders does not merely inconvenience an individual. It undermines the constitutional framework that gives government its own legitimacy. This point deserves to be heard clearly. The court was not simply defending Nnamdi Kanu. It was defending the principle that makes courts worth anything at all. If government institutions can sit on binding judicial orders without consequence, then every court order in this country becomes conditional. And a conditional court order is not law, it is a request. The compensation order also came back into focus today. The court reaffirmed that the federal government remains under legal obligation to compensate Kanu for the constitutional violations connected to his unlawful conviction and continued detention. What makes this reaffirmation particularly striking is the additional dimension now attached to it. The original compensation was ordered in response to the invalid conviction and the imprisonment connected to it. But the period of detention that followed the first release order, the days and weeks during which Kanu remained locked up despite a court having declared his imprisonment unlawful, that period now forms part of the legal picture. Every day of detention after the court's first ruling was a day without lawful authority, and the court has made clear that this entire sequence of events falls within the scope of the constitutional violations it has identified. The federal government's legal exposure in this matter has not narrowed since the first judgment. It has grown. Now let us address the broader implications, because this case has long stopped being only about Nnamdi Kanu. Nigeria operates as a constitutional democracy. That phrase is not decoration. It carries specific meaning. It means that the Constitution is the supreme law. It means that the judiciary exists as an independent arm of government with authority to check the actions of the executive and the legislature. It means that when a court makes a binding order, the executive branch does not possess the authority to override it through inaction, administrative delay, or political calculation. What has happened in the weeks between the first court order and today's second directive is a stress test of those principles, and the results of that test are visible to every observer of this case inside Nigeria and beyond its borders. Legal analysts have begun describing this situation as one of the most significant confrontations between judicial authority and executive compliance in recent Nigerian history. The court has now issued two separate directives for the same release. The fact that a second one became necessary is itself a statement about the condition of constitutional governance in this country. The judge acknowledged this directly. The court stated that the rule of law depends on the willingness of institutions to respect and enforce valid court orders once delivered. It further stated that failure to comply with lawful judgments weakens public confidence in the justice system and undermines constitutional governance. These are not abstract observations. They are a direct assessment of what has been happening with this case. For Kanu's legal team, today's proceedings represented something beyond courtroom procedure. His lawyers argued before the court that the continued detention following the first release order amounted to unlawful imprisonment under the Constitution. They were not presenting a new legal theory. They were pointing to what the court itself had already established and asking it to enforce what it had already decided. The defense maintained that constitutional rights are not enforceable only when the government finds them convenient. They are enforceable always. And the court's role when those rights are violated is to intervene and restore legality. The court agreed, and it acted accordingly. Outside the courtroom, the reaction was immediate. Supporters of Kanu who had gathered near the court complex responded to news of the second ruling with a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that the court had not abandoned its earlier position. Frustration that a second ruling had become necessary at all. For many observers, the fact that the government could not or did not implement the first order within a reasonable time frame has itself become a damaging symbol of how political considerations can interrupt the path of justice in Nigeria. Legal commentators noted that the court's decision to reissue and reinforce the release directive sets an important precedent. It signals that courts in Nigeria will not treat non-compliance as a matter to be managed quietly through procedural extensions. Where a binding order is not implemented, the court will return to it, restate it, and direct it with greater specificity until compliance is achieved. Several practitioners also pointed to the language used in today's ruling as deliberately calibrated. The judge chose terms that closed off the escape routes that had previously allowed for administrative delay. The order was not referred back to committee. It was not made conditional on further review. It was stated plainly and aimed directly at the institutions with the power to open those prison doors. Here is where this case now stands. The Federal High Court has overturned Nnamdi Kanu's life sentence for the second time in terms of legal effect, having now reinforced its original declaration with a fresh and more forceful directive. The conviction remains null and void. The compensation order against the federal government remains in place and has been reaffirmed. And the order for immediate release, first delivered in the earlier ruling and now restated today, carries the full weight of a court that has made clear it will not be ignored. The government faces a choice that is increasingly difficult to dress up in procedural language. Comply with the court or continue down a path that places its relationship with the Constitution on public display for the country and the international community to examine. The court said it plainly today. The duty of the judiciary is not to satisfy public opinion. It is to apply the law based on constitutional principles. The government's duty is simpler still: obey the law it claims to operate under. Nigeria is watching. The courts have spoken twice. And the question that now hangs over this entire situation is the same one we opened with. When a court speaks and the government refuses to listen, what exactly is the law worth? That is not a question Afrosite Forum can answer for you. That is a question this government must answer for itself through its actions in the days ahead. This is Afrosite Forum. We will continue following every development in this case as it unfolds. Do not go anywhere.